Welcome back to the 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show. My name is Wayne Kimmel, managing partner of 76 Capital, the sports tech venture capital company. On this show, I interview top sports entrepreneurs, athletes, and executives who are shaping and many times changing the sports business industry. You can subscribe to our show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our 76 Capital website. Today, my guests on our 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show are Mark Hicks and Clint Hangebrauck from the NCAA. I'm really excited about this show. We are going to talk about some really exciting things. And before we get started, let me give you a little bit of background on Mark. Mark is the managing director of enforcement. His primary role is leading enforcement around sport and all sorts of issue-specific and relationship and development initiatives across sports wagering, NIL, across football, basketball, baseball, and track and field. His work involves helping member institutions and conferences navigate complex NCAA regulations while consulting public and private entities as they intersect with the NCAA. Clint has been the managing director and director of enterprise risk management at the NCAA since January of 2022. He has over 14 years of experience at the NCAA, previously serving as a deputy quality control in the enforcement department for over 8 years. In his current role, Clint has been responsible for overseeing enterprise risk management initiatives for the overall organization. And we're going to break all this down. Mark and Clint, welcome to the 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Yeah, really excited to have this conversation. I mean, we're getting so close to March Madness, and that's such a big thing for you in the NCAA. I mean, Mark, let me start with you. I mean, in your role as managing director of enforcement, what does it mean for you when we're getting this close to March Madness? As a fan, we're just so excited. For you, it's probably a pretty busy time.
Yeah. So, interestingly, it's almost like another day in the office. It's just for our role in the kind of the regulatory side. The NCAA hosts 91 championships, and so while there are a lot of eyes on both the women's Final Four and men's Final Four, our championships are spread out throughout the year. And on the enforcement side of things, the thing that drives our calendar most often is the recruiting calendar. So that's really what's driving news, and our work around the regulatory side is recruiting, the academic year calendar. And as you know, like sports betting, March Madness is just one of the things that certainly draws the attention of the public. CFP would be another. So anyway, long way of saying, from the regulatory side of things, our calendar is really spread out pretty evenly. It's an exciting time to be at the NCAA. It's an exciting time to be part of college athletics, but it is kind of just a normal day and normal time of year for us. So,
yeah, I'd add really quickly from my standpoint, our work does tend to ramp up a little bit during the championship season. So we really have like 3 distinct championship seasons. 1 are our fall championships, 2 are our winter championships, and then 3 are our spring. So March Madness is certainly a part of that winter championships cohort, but as Mark alluded to, we have 91 championships throughout the course of the year and 30 other championships that'll be happening around March Madness as well, from rifling to wrestling to ice hockey to swimming and diving. And so, for our work, a lot of it's really supporting from a travel standpoint. I think we've been on a tough run here recently, unfortunately, with some really tragic incidents that have come up from a travel standpoint. So just wanted to make sure we're getting all of our championship teams to their destination safely and on time and things like that. We also worry a lot just about the security of our events, and we want to make sure they're safe for our fans that are participating. We saw what happened at the Sugar Bowl over New Year's Eve in New Orleans, and just a tragic circumstance. So spending a lot of time just looking through our security plans and posture and making sure we're as prepared as possible to have really exciting and safe championship events.
Clint, it's interesting you mentioned travel and safety. I mean, it's such an important thing that most just the casual fan overlooks that part of this. And just think the players and coaches and the fans and the cheerleaders, they just sort of just show up, right? There they are. And you somehow are able to move the men's team and the women's team, and they just end up there. But how does that happen? How do you work with the schools to make sure that everything is, everyone gets there in a safe way?
Yeah, it's really an amazing and fascinating process. So if you just look at March Madness alone, that's 136 teams that are competing between those two tournaments, and between Selection Sunday and competition, kicking off a couple days later, you have to get those teams from all of their home destinations to, all of the various sites across the country that they're traveling to. We're really fortunate to work with a travel agency called Shorts Travel. We've been with them for a long time. And so we basically have a bunch of staff that are bunkered out of Waterloo, Iowa, that do nothing else for 2-3 weeks of the tournament than just coordinating all of the travel that's happening back and forth between the men's and women's basketball tournaments and the other 28 tournaments that I alluded to. We are fortunate in that we use charter carriers, as you alluded to. It's not just the team that needs to get there, but it's their families, it's the band, it's the cheer squad, it's the coaches, it's the athletic directors and folks like that. So we have a really comprehensive process to work with those teams as they're selected, identify their travel parties, and then work with those different charter carriers and inventory that we have to get everybody safely to their destination and in time to be able to be there for tip-off.
Fascinating. I mean, look, as fans, Selection Sunday, and then you're there on the men's side, right? And you got your brackets, you start filling them out, you're looking to figure out what the lines are, all that kind of stuff, and that's you're moving the people. And Mark, you are worrying about the lines and all that other kind of stuff. Yeah. And how do you kind of oversee all of that stuff when that's happening?
Well, it's first of all, we can't do it alone. And one of as Clint and I have figured out over the years, it's really, really important to have really strong relationships with different people and entities throughout the business. So whether that's IC360, it might be Sport Radar, it might be IBIA, those just from an integrity monitoring standpoint, but also with the operators themselves. So, we can pick up the phone and call pretty much any operator we need to at a pretty high level to check on things or whatnot. So, having a bunch of relationships in the sports betting space, I think, is just really, really important for us when it comes to monitoring things that are happening. Same thing with regulators. It's probably not who we're talking to at that time, but like if an issue arose, then we would certainly be able to plug in with an operator. But again, in some ways, that's like normal course of action. It's you would think it would peak during a championship, but that's not necessarily the case. So, but anyway, it does. We're collecting information all the time, and that information comes from different sources. And so having those relationships and the ability to pick up the phone and communicate quickly is really, really important. And everybody has a different role in the space as well. And even on the integrity side, each of the operators or services play just a slightly different role. And that's really, really valuable, especially with so much that's going on, so many sports that we have, seeing the growth of sports betting and different sports other than basketball. Another thing we really haven't talked about or here necessarily, but yeah, those relationships are key.
I mean, what are some of the sports that maybe we wouldn't think about that are now being bet on from a collegiate perspective?
So Clint, back me up here. Like we've talked about, college hockey is starting to really garner a lot of attention. Certainly, football and basketball, College World Series, we'll see. So another complicated tournament to run. If you think about getting everybody, in different games throughout the country, then to Omaha, it takes a long time. But baseball, we've seen growth in volleyball. And I guess I'm not surprised when you start putting 100,000 people in an outdoor arena to watch a volleyball game or what, that sport certainly taken off. An interesting side note, Clint and I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to visit with regulatory agencies outside the United States. And they were really interested in talking to the guys from the NCAA. And I would describe it as like we were zoo exhibits because it's just an interesting setup where a governing body or organization has so many different sports that from outside the United States looking in, it's a lot of new content for them. And they're learning about the different sports and seeing the growth and popularity. So I think we're primed to see a lot of content evolution, here in the future, but that's both domestically and internationally. So I don't know, other sports, Clint, I mean, we're seeing a lot of growth in areas.
No, I think you touched on most of them. We have seen in women's softball as well, some increasing markets there. Certainly in like lacrosse, that's tends to be popular, especially in the Northeast from a betting standpoint. Wrestling, we've seen markets there. So really across a lot of our different sports and championships, we're seeing growing interest from the betting community.
Well, before we get too deep into one specific thing, I'd love to sort of zoom back out. And Mark, maybe start with you. And if you could just give a little bit of your background, how you ended up at the NCAA. I see that helmet behind you, and your football. So you had your career in on that side of things. But love to hear all about your background.
Man, in a million years, I never thought I'd work at the NCAA. It was never part of the plan. But I did start in coaching. I coached football for just around a decade. I coached both, started in high school, coached on Division II level as well. And really thought, man, that's all I ever really wanted to do. Loved it, had a great experience, had an opportunity to be on some championship teams, small level, but just a really great experience. But around age 30, maybe that was my hopefully not my mid-year crisis at age 30, but certainly started reflecting, didn't know what I wanted to do long-term, and decided to go to law school. And it was during law school that I had the opportunity to be a law clerk at the NCAA. And at that time, we only had 2 lawyers, a very small shop. It was in 2005. We had only been in Indianapolis about 5 years at that point. So they moved from Kansas City. But came here and had a phenomenal experience as a law clerk, met people throughout the building, got to work with championships on some projects. I worked on a regulatory side of things. And then when I graduated from law school, they hired me here in our legislative affairs membership services group. So interpreting bylaws and that type of thing. It set me on a path for regulatory affairs. And then I was on a group of people that helped build the Eligibility Center, which was a company that we started after the Clearinghouse, which is a great opportunity to be part of something from the ground level. Fascinating opportunity, kind of like a startup, but with somebody else's money, like they funded it and we built it. It was a great experience, a lot of fun. Most people, when you come to the NCAA, don't get to build things from scratch, but we had the opportunity to do that. And then in January 2014, came to enforcement and started building this concept called development with this kind of external affairs, external relations, making sure that we're the eyes and ears of what's happening. And that extends into sports betting and issues like NIL or, recruiting in football and basketball, and got to work with people like Clint. So there's been a lot of twists and turns. Again, never predicted any of that, but that's kind of what brought me to the NCAA. And that was almost 20 years ago.
Wow. Well, Clint, I'd love to hear your background as well.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief, but I graduated from Purdue as a business grad in 2003 and had a marketing minor. So like any natural marketing transition, I ended up becoming an auditor of all things. But I was doing some work with Walmart, and they actually had like a corporate audit position that was starting. It was a good opportunity to travel domestically and internationally. And I just thought, it may be interesting kind of learning how corporations work from one of the largest corporations in the world. So I spent about 4 years at Walmart, working all over the U.S., a lot of time in Bentonville, Arkansas, where they're headquartered. And then they were actually consolidating a lot of our jobs there, and wasn't quite ready to make the leap to moving to the wonderful town of Bentonville. Although I hear now it's a booming mountain biking and cycling scene. Mark and I both appreciate cycling, so I'm going to have to get back there at some point. But ended up going into like a risk consulting firm, really large CPA firm called Crow that I worked for. That's based here out of the Midwest. And around that time, so this was like 2007, there was Enron and WorldCom and a lot of the public companies that were folding due to corporate fraud and misstating financial statements. And so there was really a boom in terms of regulation over those industries. So really spent like the next 4 years working with a lot of publicly traded companies, just trying to tighten their financial controls and improve processes and avoid fraud and all of those things. And so I had just like a 1-week project with the NCAA that's based out of Indianapolis, and thought, this would just be incredible to go on site and meet some folks and look behind the curtain of a little bit of what happens here at the national office. And ended up just being a real natural fit. I was able to contribute on that project pretty fast, and they were actually thinking about creating their first audit function. So they said, would you like to come over here and do that at the NCAA? So around that time, I came over. I did that role for a couple years, and then we had a couple of cases on the enforcement side that sort of went awry, and we didn't necessarily follow some of our internal rules and policies. And so our member institutions really called for, we want to create some sort of quality control function within enforcement that helps just make sure that we're consistent in our decision making across cases, try to improve timeliness and operations and create efficiencies and have better technology and all those things. And so, it's certainly outside of my comfort zone, but I thought I'm going to take that leap. And so I started in enforcement right around the same time as Mark. I had the good fortune to do that for about 8 years. And then this position really opened up with enterprise risk management a few years ago. And so I've stepped into that, but still very connected with my colleagues over on the enforcement side and have a great appreciation for the work that they do. So it's just a hopefully quick snippet into what got me to the role today.
Well, it's really helpful to hear both of them. I mean, and Clint, I mean, you mentioned, the role that you're in now as managing director of enterprise risk management. Maybe expand upon that a little bit and what that really means. I mean, it sounds like it sounds like an insurance company sort of title, but it's at the NCAA. It's around sports. It's it's such an important part. What does it really mean in what you do?
Yeah, it is kind of a unique and sort of opaque sort of role. I think, like you said, a lot of people hear risk management and they just think insurance, and we certainly do that, but that's actually a separate function at the NCAA. I work really closely with our director of insurance just to look at all of our policies across all the work that we do. But really, enterprise risk management, it's more of a strategic exercise to understand, like, what are our core objectives as an organization that we're trying to accomplish. We want to have great championships. We want to protect competition. We want to protect student athletes. We want to graduate student athletes. So, okay, now that we know what our sort of North Star is from an objective standpoint, what are those key risks, those key, rocks that we need to unturn that may prevent us from accomplishing those objectives? And so that's really what my role focuses on. It's trying to help us identify risks that we face at the national office, rate those risks so that we could actually prioritize, like, how likely is it that this risk is going to occur? If it does occur, how impactful is it going to be to us? So then once we have sort of that clear picture of the risks that we're facing as an organization, I think it really allows us to thoughtfully manage those. And there's different strategies we could take. You could transfer risks to outside organizations. You could accept them. You could just get out of the business of doing whatever you're doing to create the risk to begin with. So it's really that kind of strategic framework and construct that's the lens that I look through, and then really try to put that information in front of our senior leadership, our board of governors, and other governance committees that we have to really just help them make informed decisions and, at the end of the day, mitigate our risk profile as an organization. I will say, like, there is just a ton of risk that higher ed and college athletics is facing overall. Thankfully, for my sanity, it's not thinking through all of those lenses. It's a little bit more of like, what do we really control at the national office? And again, it's things like I talked about, having a safe championship experience for student athletes, from a gender equity standpoint, making sure that they're comparable. I do a lot with our data and information and cybersecurity and things like that, making sure that we're protecting the systems and the records that we have. So a little bit more of what we actually like control within the four walls here at the national office.
It makes a lot of sense. And, one of the things that I'd love to touch on, certainly something that is core to everything that we do at 76 Capital is the technology and how technology is being used across sports today. I mean, Mark, let's talk about a little bit about that. I mean, how you're seeing technology being used across the collegiate landscape today.
Yeah, I think from my vantage point, I'm like looking through the lens of our campuses and recruiting. So I know from when I began to coach years ago and see what's going through today, the data analytics from both recruiting but also on the field is dramatically different, right? So that's where, that doesn't necessarily impact my job day to day on the more traditional recruiting and enforcement kind of side of things. But certainly on campus, that data and that technology advancement has become extremely important for each sport in different ways. Like a company like Huddle, for instance, a group that we're real familiar with, and just, putting film on servers. It's amazing that really wasn't that long ago, because I lived in the difference of technology advancement in my days was the difference between a VHS tape and a DVD, right? Like that was technology growth right there. And now when you look at the way we use film in coaching, replay, officials, like all of that, like the game has been impacted so dramatically. But that's not so much here. Here, I think data, and you see it with the betting stuff, it's just it's so key to what we're doing, being able to evaluate data on the integrity of games. And those resources are certainly in that part of my job are really, really important. And I think we'll only get better. And one small leap from that would be how sophisticated the operators are, the betting operators. So if you're looking from a compliance standpoint and a welfare standpoint, for them to be able to know who their customer is and whether or not underage people are betting, or are there prohibited bettors from an integrity standpoint engaged in betting on a platform, like the technology that they have that I've just seen improve over a 2-year time period, will only continue to grow. So again, not maybe spot on to your question, but I've seen it in different aspects across different areas of the work that I do.
Yeah, I mean, before Clint, you jump in, I just want to maybe clarify it a little bit. I mean, you think about technology, maybe even from a media perspective. I mean, the fact that most college and university games are on quote unquote TV or being streamed somewhere.
Yeah.
What's been the impact? Certainly betting, that's one piece of it, but also just the fact that it's you can almost watch any game on any campus at any time. It's unbelievable today.
Well, it's made the world smaller, right? And it's more accessible for parents and families and people like that. But it's introduced colleges and places to the world that maybe other people might might not remember or not know, right? It's not just about the University of North Carolina or Kansas or Southern Cal or whatever, but like there's an opportunity for exposure on all three divisions. So we have divisions 1, 2, and 3. And I think one of the projects is we're trying to make sure all the D3 content is available. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think just the exposure alone to the sports individually and the competitors, and then the ability for them to be seen, kind of worldwide, if you will, like certainly a huge growth opportunity.
I mean, and Clint, from your perspective, does that add to the overall risk? Does that add to the overall that there's so much is out there?
Yeah, I think of it more as a benefit than a risk. I mean, we have over 19,000 teams, and so I think it's really an advantage, like Mark said, with a media standpoint, that hopefully you could get all those teams to have coverage, and there's some streaming platform or digital platform out there that gives them that kind of shining moment, and fans could tune in and see their contests. And so I think of it less from risk perspective and more just the benefit that it creates for student athletes. I think from a risk standpoint, where I see technology, one of the areas I think technology could really play in is the NIL environment. And I still worry about a lot of young people out there, 18 to 22-year-olds, kind of striking deals that may not be to their sort of maximum benefit at the end of the day. Folks out there that may want to take advantage of them. So I think some of the technology enhancements that we've seen is really in the NIL landscape. There's a tool called NIL Assist that's been created now. It really creates like financial transparency so that student athletes in different sports, different markets could really understand like what their value proposition is, has like standard terms for contracts and things like that. And then just a lot of education that needs to happen. I don't know about you all, but I wasn't the best at managing money when I was in college and 18 to 22, and could find all kinds of places to blow any cash that I had. So when you think of it in the NIL landscape and potentially significant dollars, like really trying to give student athletes the tools to, here's how you invest that money wisely, here's how you create budgets, here's how you save, here's all of the responsible things that you could do with your money, and hopefully keep them out of some real negative consequences from a financial standpoint, because there's a lot of sort of mousetraps out there, and not just sports betting, but crypto and alternative investments, and all kinds of ways to blow money if you want to. So hopefully making sure that they have the tools and resources to invest responsibly.
Well, certainly. I mean, that brings up an important piece of this. I mean, as all of these things are happening now, from NIL, from there's, no one knows what's going to really happen with the House settlement in April. I mean, when that comes down, if it actually all comes to be, I mean, who knows, right? But at the same time, I think you hit a great point, Clint. I mean, it's about education, no matter what happens here, right? How do we educate the student athletes, the coaches, the administrators, just fans, boosters, everybody, on like what the rules are, what you can and can't do, and just try to make this whole game of collegiate athletics just safe and fun. I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that we can do, and sort of make sure that we're not in a position where there are problems. So Mark, what do you think about all that? I mean, what's your solution here?
Yeah, there's a lot to educate on. Number one, and Clint's good about, let's stay focused on the part that's our responsibility and what we can control, and talked a little bit about that from a risk perspective. But I think probably people may not fully understand, but there are kind of five. To me, there are 5 levels of education that have to happen. And as Clint mentioned, 19,000 teams. That's about 500,000 student athletes, and probably, you don't know exactly, but 250,000, maybe 500,000, I don't know, employees that fit on all those campuses that are under that kind of umbrella of the NCAA. So I don't know, 750,000 to 1 million people, and that number rotates out, right? So it's a revolving door. So there's a lot of education to do. So it takes a lot of different layers, and at the top of that, it's kind of like a pyramid. There are certain things that we can lead from at the national level. We have intersection with student athletes at the eligibility center as they come into their college experience. We have things that we can do to push out from a very high level to help start and initiate conversation and to create some level of resources. And then you have that conference level. So it's like the next level down, a little more finer point, because they're going to have access to a smaller cohort or a smaller group of schools, if you will. Could still be a large number, but it's not the same amount as having the whole entire country. And so you'll see conferences have their own educational strategies for their schools, and they may engage with partners like IC360 to do stuff on campus through a conference arrangement. And then you actually have the campuses themselves, and through their compliance office or others that they may bring in from the campus community to help educate just their student athletes. And again, that might be 250, 500, 800 kids, right? Student athletes. So there's that layer. And then one of the things that we're starting to encourage is really that coach involvement. And we know that the coach has such an important relationship with a student athlete. So they're a person of influence. So the more the coach can echo these things that can help be an educator, the better, I think the better off, the better education is going to get to the student athlete. So that's a layer, right? And then lastly, educating the parents so they can educate their student athletes is another thing, right? So like there's this tiered approach. We're really focused on the top, but we want the top being what comes out of the national office. But I do feel like we can help drive conversation and resources and create opportunities for all the way through that pyramid for those things to be used at that particular level. But there's no way that we can be responsible for educating everybody all the way through. It is truly a team effort. Not just like, a campus on its own can't. It's got to take the parents and the conference, the coaches. So anyway, that's how we approach it. And we try to have resources there for kind of all five of those layers.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that we can touch on and so many different levels we can go into here. But as we start to wrap up here on our 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show, I really appreciate both of you coming on. It's great to have you and get what you guys do at the NCAA and the role of the organization across collegiate sports and how important of a role you play. When you look to it and maybe to wrap up here, maybe Clint, I'll start with you on this, but what are some of the things that you think about, or maybe just one or two things that you look at as really positive opportunities or exciting things that are coming down the pike that we as fans, as people that are, companies like our IC360 and others that are partners with you, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about, how we can help you and help the overall games and all these championships and all these schools, and how can we make it all better?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I'm just so impressed by the innovative ideas that you have and your stakeholders have. So you all would probably have better ideas than me, but just a couple thoughts come to mind. One is, I think when people talk about the NCAA, they really gravitate towards like football and basketball as sort of like the shiny objects. But I would say where the growth really is a lot of our other sports, and we've touched on that, but we are just seeing astronomical gains in ratings, media coverage, marketing opportunities, et cetera, and so many other sports like women's gymnastics, baseball, softball, women's volleyball, wrestling, tennis, soccer. There's just so many opportunities, I think, with some of those sports that are really in sort of the beginning of their growth phase now. So I think that's really an opportunity that's out there to help think about how do you market these sports, how do you get more exposure, and then sort of part and parcel with that. I just think NIL certainly brings up challenges and risks, and we could talk about those for hours and days, but it creates a lot of opportunities too. And there's just so many creative ways for student athletes to become marketable, to then make their sport and their competitions more marketable. So just continuing to help think about ways to innovate there and provide really great NIL opportunities to our student athletes out there.
I mean, I got to follow up on that. I mean, I love that. I mean, so the idea of like innovating and thinking about it, because like, look, you guys have been in this game for a while, right? I mean, it must be exciting to see all of these new brands, all these new companies and corporations that are taking an interest in collegiate sports, right? I mean, that's the opportunity here. Yes, it's more money and there's money flying all over the place, but we'll figure that all out. But like, it must be exciting to just see the level of interest.
Absolutely. Yeah, not only from investors, but just fans. Like everyone's excited about college sports, and live sports is just such a unique, like college athletics is unique to America. Like we have countries all over the world that are just trying to like figure out what we do. Like Mark said, we're sort of a petri dish for the rest of the world. So it's just great to see like the level of excitement around this unique, special, wonderful thing that we have in the States that's called college athletics. So hope it continues to grow.
Well, I'm really excited that we were able to get both of you on the show, and we got to stay in touch. I know we always bump into each other and all around the country, and but I'd love to have you back, and as things continue, and we'll see what happens with all the things that'll happen this year. And I think that the 25-26 season will be different, right? Or there'll be some new innovation, or there'll be some kind of change, but who knows? But the bottom line is people are incredibly passionate about college sports. People love college sports. It's amazing, how many great athletes and great people that have come through the collegiate sports world. And I believe that continues to happen, but it just may look a little different than it is today. So we'll see.
Thanks for having us, Wayne. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Everything you're doing.
It's great.
Thanks, guys. On behalf of the entire 76 Capital team, thank you for joining us for this edition of our Sports Leadership Show. Please remember to subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast network or on the 76 Capital website. You can also explore the hundreds of episodes we've produced over the past several years on those same networks. And as always, go out there and make it happen.